The day my daughter and I got fined $500 for fishing was the day I stopped being a grieving widower and started becoming a problem. That Saturday morning was supposed to be quiet. Just me, my 14-year-old daughter Emily, and a couple of fishing poles. The sky was pale blue, the lake was still, and for the first time in weeks I saw her smile. Not one of those half-hearted, "I'm okay, Dad" smiles, but a real one that reached her eyes. We were sitting on the little dock at the center of Willow Creek Lakeside, the kind of picturesque suburban neighborhood where every lawn is manicured and every mailbox has to be HOA approved. It wasn't just a fishing trip, it was tradition, a ritual. The last thing the three of us, Emily, her mother Evelyn, and I, used to do together before Evelyn passed away from cancer last winter. Fishing was our reset button, our sanctuary, and I'd be damned if I let grief steal that too. But then came the voice, clipped, cold, unmistakably entitled. "Excuse me, but what do you think you're doing?" We turned. She was standing at the edge of the dock, arms crossed over a perfectly pressed pastel jacket, a tablet in one hand and judgment in the other. Margot Langford, president of the HOA. If that name doesn't mean anything to you yet, it will. I introduced myself politely, told her we were just fishing, that we'd moved in 2 months ago, and that the realtor had actually highlighted the lake as a community amenity. She didn't care. "Fishing is prohibited," she said flatly. "That's a $500 violation. I'll be filing it today." Emily froze beside me. I felt her body go stiff, like she'd just been hit in the chest. And just like that, the smile was gone. "Let me ask you something. Have you ever been punished for doing something completely harmless? Something that was meant to bring healing, not harm?" Let me be clear. This wasn't about a fish, or bait, or some invisible rule change allegedly emailed to residents and mysteriously missing from every inbox I checked that night. This was about power, about someone who'd grown too comfortable with unchallenged control, and who thought that grief makes a man weak. But here's the thing Margot didn't know. Before I moved here, I spent 18 years building and exiting some of the most successful tech startups on the West Coast. I knew how to read contracts. I knew how to follow money. I knew how to dismantle systems, politely, legally, and very, very effectively. She fined the wrong father. So let me ask you this before we go any further. Should a community be run by people or by rigid rules with no room for compassion? Because this story doesn't end with a fish. It ends with a lake, a legacy, and one hell of a reckoning. "Fishing is prohibited," she said, with the kind of cold confidence that only comes from knowing no one ever dares to challenge you. Margot Langford stood rigid at the edge of the dock, tablet in hand, like some HOA version of a traffic cop, minus the badge but twice the entitlement. I blinked. "Prohibited? Since when?" "As of March 1st, she said crisply, tapping her screen. "Amended in Section 3.4 of the Lakeside Commons Regulation Addendum. It clearly states that fishing, swimming, and other unregulated recreational activities are no longer permitted due to environmental and aesthetic concerns." Emily looked up at me, confused. I put a hand on her shoulder, keeping my voice calm. "I don't recall receiving any notice about that." Margot didn't blink. "All residents were notified via email. Perhaps you should check your spam folder. The HOA cannot be responsible for residents failing to stay informed." She rotated the screen to show me the document. There it was, an amendment date stamped 4 weeks ago. Tiny text, dry language, the kind of thing you could easily miss if you weren't actively looking for it. But I wasn't new to bureaucratic sleight of hand. I'd built tech companies. I'd been in rooms where million-dollar deals fell apart over missing footnotes. And right now, something didn't sit right. "Was there a community vote?" I asked. She paused just for a half second, but it was enough. "It was approved by the board under emergency executive authority," she said. "Given the increase in litter and wildlife disturbances, the board deemed it necessary for the preservation of the community atmosphere." Emergency authority? For banning fishing? On a lake that, up until last month, was proudly featured in the community brochure as a tranquil haven for outdoor family bonding? That night, after Emily had gone to bed, I pulled out the HOA welcome packet, the bylaws, and every digital document we'd received since moving in. Nowhere was there a record of a vote, a meeting, or even a basic notice about this so-called amendment. Worse, when I checked the HOA's online portal, the update was buried 6 clicks deep, listed under miscellaneous maintenance notes, subtle, almost invisible, but not to me. By 1 a.m., I had my browser open to the county's community governance database. I started digging into the HOA's amendment history. That's when I noticed something strange. Over the past 3 years, more than a dozen emergency policy changes had been pushed through unilaterally by Margot's signature alone. Phishing was just the tip of the iceberg. The next morning, I stepped out to grab the paper when I spotted an older gentleman walking his dog down the sidewalk. Tall, upright posture, neatly cropped silver hair, and eyes that looked like they'd seen far more than he cared to admit. "You must be the new guy Margot fined for phishing," he said without missing a beat. "Leon Barrett. I live 3 doors down." I nodded. No surprise. In a neighborhood like this, word travels faster than Wi-Fi. "She's been running this place like her personal monarchy for years," he continued with a dry smile. "Most folks just roll over and pay. But you? I heard you didn't." "I'm not a fan of fuzzy rules," I replied. Leon let out a genuine chuckle. "Then you're going to enjoy this. Why don't you drop by for coffee later? I've got something you'll want to see." Leon's home felt like a time capsule from a courthouse library. Dark wood shelves lined with law books, framed photos of him alongside judges and attorneys, and right in the center of the table, a thick file tied with red string. "You know that lake?" he began, flipping a page. "It's not even owned by the HOA. It belongs to a private developer, Holloway Urban Properties. They leased recreational rights to the HOA for 30 years. But that lease expires in less than 60 days. I sat up straighter. "You're kidding." "Nope, but most people assume the HOA owns everything. And Margot, she counts on that ignorance." He slid the folder toward me. Inside were copies of land use agreements, subdivision maps, even handwritten notes from the early days of the community's development. "She's playing a long game," Leon said carefully. "And if you're smart, you'll start watching where the money's flowing. Before she makes a move no one can undo." I closed the folder, my thoughts racing. Margot Langford wasn't just some arrogant HOA president. She was orchestrating a chess game. And most of us didn't even know we were on the board. Leon didn't just give me information. He opened the door to a quiet resistance I never knew existed. "If you really want to understand what's going on," he said, "you need to meet Carlton Pierce." Carlton lived at the far end of Forest Elm Drive, in a modest house with ivy curling up the porch railing. A black man in his 60s, he moved slowly, but his eyes were sharp. Before retiring, he was director of credit analysis at a local bank. The kind of man the HOA would rather not have at their meetings. "I don't care for drama," Carlton said as he welcomed me into his study, "but I don't like being treated like I'm invisible either." I was ready to enjoy my peace, but when I saw how Margot was forcing people out of their own homes, I couldn't sit still anymore. He powered up his computer. Rows of color-coded data appeared. 10 years of records. On the left, homeowner names. On the right, violation types, citation dates, time to sale, sale price, and buyer name. Margot created a pattern, Carlton explained. She targets inconvenient residents, newcomers, single parents, minorities, with vague infractions, grass too long, porch light too bright, flag hung at the wrong angle. He tapped a key. The screen zoomed in on 8 properties, each sold 15 to 20% below market value. The buyers? A web of shell companies, Langford Asset Group, Green Lake Acquisitions, East Shore Realty, all traced back to the same downtown office, the same place Margot registered her real estate business. And here's why, Carlton added, opening a dated zoning map. The lake was dead center, surrounded by prime land, a stretch along the shoreline never developed, previously restricted by outdated environmental codes. But those laws have changed, and if Margot owns the lake... I stared at the diagram. A chill crawled up my spine. This wasn't just about me anymore. She was turning other people's hardship into profit, and I'd walked Emily right into the trap Evelyn always tried to protect her from. She could build 5, maybe 7 luxury lakefront homes, easily worth millions, Carlton said. Carlton pulled up another spreadsheet. This one transitioned from cool blues to angry reds, data like a pulse line running through the community. I started this just to track violations, he said, but after a few years, a disturbing pattern emerged. Across the screen, Black, Hispanic, and immigrant homeowners had been cited for infractions at nearly 3 times the rate of their longtime white neighbors. Newer residents were often fined within months of moving in, while legacy homeowners rarely faced any citations, even for identical offenses. This isn't just bad management, Carlton said quietly. It's a system of exclusion wrapped in rules and regulations. I stared at the screen, not because I was surprised, but because of how surgically precise it all was. No shouting, no slurs, just quiet, consistent pressure until people broke. And I'm guessing, I said, none of the people who left ever came back to fight it? Carlton shook his head. They were too tired, too alone. That night I sat at my desk, replaying faces in my mind. The elderly man fined for holiday lights. The single mom banned from the community pool. The Asian woman whose backyard had been inspected without notice. They weren't weak. They were isolated. I opened my laptop and created an encrypted group chat. Then I typed a message and began sending it to the names Carlton had listed. You're not imagining it. I have data and a plan. If you've ever been targeted by the HOA, I want to hear your story. Everything will be confidential. That night, 9 people replied. The next morning, I stepped out onto my porch. Margot Langford strolled by in her usual oversized sunglasses, her practiced smile in place. She had no idea what was coming. But from this moment on, the rules of the game had changed. The next morning, I stepped out onto my porch. Margot Langford strolled by in her usual oversized sunglasses, her practiced smile in place, serene, calculated. She had no idea what was coming. But from this moment on, the rules of the game had changed. What I didn't realize was that Margot had already made her first move, and it would land harder and faster than anything I was prepared for. I knew time was running out. Leon had warned me. The lease on the lake between the HOA and the development company would expire in less than 2 months. Once the property hit the open market, there'd be no second chance. I needed to move first, and I needed to move quietly. His name was Eli Navarro, an old friend from the finance world, a specialist in off-market asset acquisitions. We'd once worked together redeveloping an abandoned textile factory in North Carolina. Eli knew how to make deals that were fast, clean, and invisible. No names, no leaks. I need you to find the rep handling liquidations over at Holloway Urban Properties, I told him. And I want to offer cash. Full amount. No financing. Eli paused for a beat, then nodded. If they're hurting for liquidity, we've got a shot. But we've got to move fast. 10 days max. Meanwhile, Margot was making her own move. The HOA meeting that week was labeled an emergency session on environmental upgrades. But buried at agenda item number 7 was the real purpose. Proposal to establish the Lakeside Lake Restoration Fund. With a modest contribution of $50 per household per month, Margot cooed, her voice sweet as synthetic sugar, we could give our beautiful lake the care it deserves: solar lighting, updated walkways, eco-filtration systems. I stared at the paper in my hands, then up at Margot's rehearsed smile at the head of the table. She thought no one would bother reading past item 3. But I read it, every word, and I knew exactly what game she was playing. I had 6 days left before the HOA would vote to approve the fund, effectively giving Margot the capital she needed to make her own bid on the lake. If I didn't act now, it would all slip away. I didn't object. I didn't even raise a question. I just quietly filed the paperwork for a brand new holding company. Greystone Civic Holdings, LLC, registered to a quiet law office in the next city over. On record, Greystone was a civic-oriented group focused on urban environmental preservation. No connection to me, except for one encrypted signature, executed through a legal proxy. 3 days after registering Greystone, I returned to Carlton's home. He was hunched over his computer, squinting at a spreadsheet, but his mind was razor sharp. I can't say exactly what Margot's planning, Carlton said, but I can tell you how she's been gaming the system for the past 10 years. He pulled up a new data table. On the left, a list of residents. On the right, race, move-in year, number of violations, sale date, and sale discount. I scanned it and felt a chill in my spine. Minority homeowners and immigrants were fined 3 times more than long-standing white residents, Carlton explained evenly. And if you've been here over a decade, you're practically untouchable, even when you break the same rules. The numbers didn't lie. Margot wasn't just a petty dictator. She had engineered a quiet, paper trail-driven system of exclusion, legal on the surface, toxic at its core. That night, I sat alone on the porch. Across the lake, the lights from Margot's house shimmered off the water, cold, detached. I pulled out my phone and texted Eli. Final stretch. Close the lake deal within 3 days. Absolute discretion. Then I opened the encrypted messaging group I'd created weeks ago, now quietly filling with people Margot had bullied. The single mom banned from the pool, the retired teacher fined for Christmas lights, the gay couple whose lawn height was measured weekly. I typed, "We are not alone, and it's time to fight back." By midnight, over a dozen replies came in. One said, "I've been waiting 5 years for this." Another, "I still have meeting minutes and fake violation photos. I'm ready." I looked out over the lake, once a symbol of control and silence. But tonight, for the first time, I saw it as a place where something bigger could begin. This was no longer just about me or Emily. This was about justice, and we weren't staying quiet anymore. But while we were reigniting hope behind closed doors, Margot Langford had already made her first move. This time, she wasn't hiding in the shadows. The final 3 days before the deadline, Eli sent me a message with just 3 words. They're wavering now. On Holloway Urban Properties' side, the development firm that owned the lake, their finances were in deeper trouble than ever. Margot had offered $300,000, paid in phases using HOA funds, masked as the Lakeside Lake Restoration Fund. But it was just that, a promise with no cash in hand. Through Greystone Civic Holdings, I made a counteroffer. $350,000 in cash. Full payment within 7 days, no contingencies. A clean, simple deal. Meanwhile, Margot was going full throttle with her eco-beautification campaign. Flyers were slipped into every mailbox. Let's elevate Lakeside Estates into a model green community. Support the Lake Restoration Fund. Only $50 per month per household. HOA meetings became weekly. Colorful renderings of lakeside upgrades were posted at the community center. But what nobody saw were her behind-the-scenes emails, her desperate pleas to Holloway. I said nothing. I raised no objections. I simply walked into a law office in the next town over, sat across from Holloway's representative, and signed the final stack of documents. After nearly 2 months of quiet maneuvering, Greystone Civic Holdings became the legal owner of the lake and its surrounding perimeter, before Margot could gather enough money to make her move. I thought it was over. It was just beginning. 2 days later, I received 3 HOA violations. Lawn overgrown by more than 3 inches, flower pots of an unapproved color, mailbox detrimental to neighborhood aesthetics. The following morning, someone knocked on my door at 7 a.m. A group of safety inspectors arrived, clipboards in hand, cameras rolling, measuring my garage door like they were prepping for a lawsuit. That afternoon, I opened my mailbox and found a handwritten note slipped inside. "You're ruining this neighborhood. Do the decent thing. Leave." Neighbors who used to wave politely now avoided eye contact entirely. Emily came home and threw her backpack to the floor, eyes red and puffy. They moved my seat in class because I was distracting others. Brielle said her mom told her we're destroying the community. No one's allowed to play with me anymore. I clenched my jaw, but Emily wasn't done. Her voice cracked. My teacher told me, if I want to fit in again, I should stop talking about the lake. I stood there speechless. I had prepared for lawsuits, politics, and power games, but I hadn't prepared for this fight to reach my daughter. That night, I sat alone on the porch. Across the lake, Margot's lights still burned bright. A shadow moved past the curtain, maybe her, maybe one of her allies. I had bought the lake, I had won the deal, but I was losing in my own home. For a moment, I thought of selling, packing up, walking away from it all. Then I heard soft footsteps behind me. Emily came out, holding a sheet of paper. It was a drawing of the lake, the trees, a little boat, and three figures, her, me, and her mother. In the top corner, written in purple marker, it said, "Mom's place, forever." I gently pulled her close. "We're not going anywhere." "You still want to fish here?" "Yes," she whispered, and in that moment I knew. This wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was a fight to protect a memory, a place of healing that Margot would never understand. The message from Eli came Monday morning. "It's done. Daniel Foster is now on the ownership deed. Lakeside Lake, 6 full acres of water and the surrounding 10-foot perimeter, was now mine. Fully, legally, irrevocably. It was no longer a shared community amenity under an HOA lease. No longer under Margot Langford's control. I had the right to terminate the old agreement, and I planned to do just that. But not yet. I chose to wait. Margot was preparing for her grand event, the launch of the Lakeside Lake Redevelopment Plan. An outdoor gathering, invitation only. Longtime residents only. Newcomers like me weren't on the list. Colorful posters hung at the community center. Plans included private lakeside lounge, exclusive docks, members-only gathering areas. Not one word about preservation or nature. Saturday afternoon, the sun was soft and low. Jazz music played over rented speakers. A buffet table stretched along the shoreline. Wine glasses clinked. The old guard of Lakeside posed for photos and smiled wide. Margot stood center stage, the unofficial queen of the neighborhood, delivering a speech on 10-year visions and community legacy. I arrived right on cue. By my side, Eli, Carlton, Leon, and an unexpected guest, Officer Reyes, the neighborhood patrol officer I'd quietly requested to ensure an orderly process. As Margot raised her glass to end her speech, I stepped up to the microphone. "Sorry to interrupt your lovely gathering," I said calmly, "but I'm afraid everyone here is currently standing on private property, without permission." The music stopped. Heads turned. Margot stepped forward, her voice just a notch too high. "What are you talking about? This is an HOA event." I nodded to Eli, who held up a notarized copy of the ownership deed. "I'm the new owner of the lake. The HOA lease agreement was terminated this morning." I paused for a beat. "Effective immediately, all attendees are trespassing. You have 15 minutes to clear the premises." Margot froze. Her lips pressed into a thin line. When Eli read aloud the name Greystone Civic Holdings, I saw something shift in her eyes. She knew that name. She knew she'd lost. Right on her own stage. You can't do this," she whispered, more to herself than to me. I smiled gently. "Under state law, I can, and I will. But before everyone leaves, I'd like to say one thing." I turned back to the microphone. My voice carried clearly across the lawn. "This lake, where I used to take my daughter fishing to help us both grieve her mother, it won't become a private lounge. It won't become luxury real estate. It will become a living nature reserve, a place where every child in this neighborhood can learn about ecosystems, conservation, and the power of healing through nature." There was silence, then a few scattered claps, quiet but sincere. An older man stood up and muttered, "So this wasn't about community improvement after all." A woman leaned toward her friend and asked, "Wait, wasn't this supposed to be a children's program?" The energy shifted. Some guests quietly gathered their things. A few walked past me and nodded in gratitude. Margot was speechless, but within days she struck back. A local law firm emailed me. The HOA was challenging my authority, claiming the prior agreement was still enforceable. Local media picked up the story. Lakeside Lake seized by new resident. Nature project raises environmental concerns. One segment even quoted Margot. "We've detected signs of serious ecological contamination in the lake. Our only goal is to protect our residents." I stared at the screen quietly, then picked up my phone and called Eli. "Send them the water quality reports and get ready for what's next." The morning after Margot's televised claim that the lake was polluted, Carlton Pierce, a former state bank financial analyst, released the report he'd quietly compiled over 10 years. At the local library, he presented it before nearly 60 residents, many of whom had kept quiet for years out of fear of getting on the list. The first slide said it all. Latino and Black homeowners received citations at 3 times the rate of white residents. Homes subjected to persistent violations were later purchased through shell companies linked back to Margot Langford. Over $75,000 from the Landscape Improvement Fund had been spent exclusively on the Northern Housing section, home to Margot's inner circle. The room froze. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Others glanced at one another, frowns deepening. An elderly woman slowly rose to her feet, voice trembling. "I used to believe she kept this place stable. But now I see that stability wasn't for all of us." Then Teresa Bloom, a longtime resident, stood up. Her voice cracked. "I volunteered as secretary for the HOA. I watched Margot approve spending without board votes. I stayed silent because I thought she knew best. But now, I realize I helped enable the abuse." A long sigh rolled through the crowd. One man murmured, "So we were all just pawns." 2 days later, Daniel hosted a gathering, not at the HOA hall, but at the home of Leon Barrett, a retired lawyer once targeted by HOA threats. There, Daniel played an audio recording. It was Margot's voice, cold, calculating. "I can make all those violations disappear, Leon. Just convince the buyer to walk away from the lake deal." Gasps echoed. A younger woman buried her face in her hands. "I actually defended her at our block meeting," she whispered. The final blow came from a security camera Daniel had quietly installed near the lake's north shore. On-screen, Margot, in a ball cap and dark coat, crouched beside the water, pouring a liquid from a small plastic bottle into the lake. The pop of the cap echoed faintly. Lab analysis later confirmed it was nitrate, a chemical known to cause toxic algae blooms. Within 24 hours, the footage was turned over to police. Margot Langford was officially under criminal investigation for environmental tampering and falsifying public health concerns. The next morning, as the neighborhood buzzed, Daniel made an announcement few saw coming. "I didn't fight for this lake to hold it hostage, but I can't hand it back to a system that's been weaponized against its own people." He laid out a proposal with quiet resolve. The lake would be transferred into a community trust under 3 binding conditions: HOA reform, no board member may serve more than 2 consecutive terms, financial transparency, all expenditures published quarterly, rotating oversight council, with representatives from each residential section, rotating every 6 months. There was silence, then a single clap, then another. Emily, seated quietly in the back, smiled at her father, eyes bright, like that day on the dock so many months ago. Someone in the crowd murmured, "Maybe Lakeside will finally be a place worth living in." Margot Langford didn't go down quietly. In the weeks that followed the public exposure, she launched every counterattack she could muster, threatening lawsuits, publishing open letters, calling in favors from city council members and journalists. But each attempt fell flat. The footage of her dumping chemicals into the lake aired on the local news twice. Her face, once associated with elegance and authority, now triggered whispers and turned heads at grocery stores. The HOA board scrambled to distance themselves. Several members resigned in quick succession, claiming ignorance, but the paper trail was too detailed. A full audit was launched, revealing misuse of funds, unapproved spending, and internal favoritism that had stretched back years. Margot was officially removed from her position. Her real estate license was suspended pending investigation. And when the State Environmental Board filed formal charges, she quietly listed her home for sale. No one bought it, not because of price, but because no one wanted to live in the shadow of that name anymore. Under the new structure proposed by Daniel, the Lakeside Community Trust was born. A diverse group of residents was elected to its oversight council, including young parents, retirees, and even a high school science teacher. The lake was officially renamed Rachel's Lake in honor of Daniel's late wife. Monthly fishing days were organized for local kids. Nature walks, ecology workshops. Emily, now more confident than ever, led a junior conservation club that attracted over 30 students from nearby schools. Something remarkable had begun to take root. Neighbors who had once barely nodded now sat together on park benches. People started painting their mailboxes again, not because of regulation, but because they wanted to take pride in where they lived. As for Daniel, he turned down an invitation to run for city council. Instead, he focused on helping other neighborhoods replicate the lakeside model: community trusts, transparent HOAs, and shared stewardship. In an interview months later, he was asked, "What did this whole fight teach you?" He paused. "That control isn't the same as leadership. That rules mean nothing without empathy. And sometimes the only way to fix a broken system is not to destroy it, but to rewrite it with better intentions, in better people." He smiled. And if you ever find yourself being fined $500 for doing something kind with someone you love, don't pay the fine. Ask who wrote the rules.